We have two people I want to recognize tonight who are responsible for this seminar for today and tomorrow. The Regents Professor in Hispanic and International Communication, Kent Wilkinson. Dr. Wilkinson, would you see here? And then the person in charge of tomorrow's program primarily is Dr. Eric Busey. He is the Marshall and Charlene Formby Regents Professor, and he will introduce tonight's speaker.
Well, thanks everyone. I really appreciate the turnout, and it's great to see everybody here. We've had a really fantastic day of panels, lots of idea exchange, lots of conversation going on, and more to happen tomorrow. So I'm really pleased with this. Kent and I put a lot of work into the organization, and all you can do is hope that it runs the way you anticipate, and I think it absolutely has. So I'm very pleased to introduce tonight's speaker, Esther Thorson of the University of Missouri, where she's a professor and associate dean of graduate studies and research. She's been there since 1993. Before that, it's important to note she was part of what really should be called a dream team of communication research at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, including herself, Byron Reeves, Jack McLeod, and the late Steve Chafee. All there at the same time, right? It's an amazing lineup if you're in communication research. Esther herself is one of the biggest names in communication research. Among other talents, she has a knack for identifying media-related trends and being on the vanguard of important research-related developments. So I'm going to take a trip through the decades, but not go back too far. In the 1980s, when the use of psychophysiology and biometrics was on the rise, Esther was there, working with Reeves and others, doing cutting-edge work, and publishing some of the first studies in communication that would use these innovative methodologies. We have this equipment in our lab today. In the 1990s, with the rise of the internet and interactive marketing and advertising, Esther was there with an edited volume on how to do research in this area. I remember copying many chapters out of that volume, but never buying the book. I suppose I should. When health communication emerged as an important area, Esther was there with work that showed the utility of communication theory to questions important to public health. It remains one of her research streams today. She's multifaceted. In the 2000s, with the rise of mobile, portable, and social media, Esther was there to show the interplay between traditional and new media dynamics, and that's the topic of her discussion tonight. And the narrative arc continues, so she's really amazingly productive and has been for the long haul. But Esther's more than a researcher. What do I mean by that? She's a mentor, first of all, to scores of graduate students over the years. Some who are my friends. You never hear a negative word about Esther. Her daughter, Kirsten, it's worth noting, is an assistant professor in public relations at the University of Southern California. And in case you're wondering, she has her mom's spark and drive. It's really dynamic as well. Esther's an idea generator. Academics and professionals listen intently to what she has to say. She's positioned at that nexus like very few people are. And she's also a highly effective administrator. So part of what she does, is serving as Associate Dean of Graduate Studies and, oh, by the way, the director of the Reynolds Journalism Institute at Missouri. So for a variety of reasons, it's really auspicious to recognize Esther as this year's Morris honoree. For one, she's conducted research with or for Morris Communications and is on a first-name basis with Billy Morris. I mean, it's really uncanny.
I don't think anybody's on first-name basis.
Mr. Morris, who she refers to as Billy. Another reason is her unique position as a researcher of both journalism and advertising, which is becoming a rarity in today's world of hyper-specialization on college campuses. So she travels in both worlds. Interestingly, if you look at her CV, and it's not short, she once chaired a symposium at the Reynolds Institute on, quote, how newspapers could have saved themselves, and some still can. This might be a topic you can follow up with her about sometime. More pertinent to our Reaching Audiences conference, she travels, as I mentioned, in the professional and academic worlds, and sees the benefits that can result from enhanced collaboration between scholars on the one hand and market researchers on the other, and somehow dissolve that boundary. Indeed, she's one of the first to recognize the synergies that could flow from an improved dialogue. And when I was at Smith Geiger, she was on the phone one day to Dave Smith, one of the principals of the company, talking about this very issue. And I followed up with Seth afterwards, his partner, and I said, so is it going to happen? He says, very slowly. There was some positive headroom, or positive progress right there. So it's important to just kind of conclude by saying Esther's synonymous with the achievements of the Missouri School of Journalism in the last 2 decades, and really is a major part of the school's international renown. This is my personal opinion, but I think it's validated by a lot of people. So we're delighted to have her here with us tonight as the Morris honoree, and we look forward to the insights she's about to share. Welcome, Esther Thorson.
Excuse me. Well, there's nothing like having people have drinks and have a nice big delicious dinner and some dessert and then have a little nap. So if any of you need to do that, just be my guest. Okay, so I'm going to try not to bore you silly tonight, but I do want to really focus in on a variety of areas of research that I've been involved in and really ask the question, how do we go about linking up with our industries, our associated industries, so that we do more than just produce students for them, although that's very, very important. And I want to recognize at the beginning of this talk, as you can see here, it takes a village in terms of research. One of my main colleagues here is Murli Mantrala, who is the Sam Walton Distinguished Professor of Marketing at MU. We worked extensively with a couple of doc students over there in the business school, Hari Sridhar and Vamsi Kanuri. I also want to recognize my dear friend and colleague Jerry Smith, who is the owner and CEO of Communicus. And then, as you can see there, I want to thank these companies, including Morris Communications, because they have been research partners in all this work. So, journalism and the art of reaching audiences. There's nothing so practical as a good theory. Well, let's see. Hello. Or there. Ah, yes. Okay. Okay, so I want to talk about the relationships, possible synergetic relationships between the industry and academic research. And I want to note to you, as you probably know, that in so many of our sister fields at the universities, the industry really depends on research in those fields. Like, for example, business law, medicine, nursing, etc. That just never happened with communication. And the question, why, is a good one to ask. I don't have time to yammer on about that tonight, but I do have some theories about it. But does that mean it's not ever changeable? No, it doesn't. So I want to talk about some ideas about how we can move into the future with much more close relationships. So Kurt Lewin is the guy who first said there's nothing so practical as a good theory. And I think it's really an important place to start this talk because theory, I mean, when you do a PhD and you become an academic, you're all about theory. I mean, you know, I was reading in a newspaper story, I think, this morning, you know, some practitioner that says, you know, those academics, all they want to do is talk about theory, as if it was a bad thing. But actually, it's the most powerful thing that we do is to theorize, because to theorize is to figure out how stuff works, right? It's more than just an observation. It's really an organizational principle. And if those organizational principles that we develop can be applied to the various and sundry industries that we are associated with, those industries will greatly benefit from that connection. So the other thing I want to say is that a lot of people say, and Mizzou has been accused of this for many, many years, okay, you're so applied, you work with the industry a lot and all this kind of thing, but you don't publish. But it turns out that you can do this kind of work and just publish your little wheels off. So I'm just giving you some examples across my career, and I've listed underneath each of these very esoteric and undoubtedly boring articles the organization that I was partnering with. So that top one was DDB. Back in those days it was DDB Needham. big ad agency in Chicago. I worked with them for many, many years. And then Los Angeles Times, Inland Press, Morris Communications, Seattle Times. So even though I was working with very applied questions, the net result was not only to solve some really interesting industry problems, but to also publish. And I think that's what we need to be able to do. Now, tonight I'm going to talk to you about 3 projects. And all these are pretty recent projects. And I think they kind of represent nicely what you can do when you partner up with somebody, with some practitioners, do some really interesting research, and then theorize about it. So the first one of the ones I'm going to talk about is the Seattle Times. They just went with a paywall Sunday. And this is an article by their editor, Dave Boardman. And what we've done with the Seattle Times is quite a number of things, but most recently, and I'm going to talk to you about this in a little bit of detail, we helped them figure out how to bundle their various and sundry products, like their mobile, their website, their print product, and so on, and how to price them. Because if you go out and price your web stuff and you just guess the price, you're undoubtedly leaving money on the table. So I don't recommend doing that. So I'm going to talk about that. And then I'm going to talk about Jacksonville. Interestingly enough, this is Morris's biggest newspaper. And they've done some, I've worked for them for about 8 years as a consultant. But the project I want to talk to you about tonight is a really interesting one. Basically, over the last 8 years, the Jacksonville Times-Union has just steadily taken out more and more money from their newsroom. So the paper got smaller and smaller. There were fewer and fewer reporters, fewer editors. I can remember years ago when you'd go into that gigantic newsroom there in Jacksonville and there were just people all over the place. That's not true anymore. But this fall, they decided to reverse that after we had shown them data for years and years and years that said, no, don't cut, add. And I'm going to show you some, what I think is really interesting research that shows that when you add money into your newsroom, that is the biggest driver of your total revenues, including your advertising revenues. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. Got it. Okay, and then last, I want to talk to you about a project that is just about to be published in, as one of the Ad Age white papers. It was authored by myself and my colleague Jerry Moore. And it's kind of an interesting example because Jerry and I were sort of hanging out and she said, you know, here's how I think the relationship between advertising, like TV advertising, and social media sites works. And I was like, wow, I got a theory for you. And so we put that together and we came up with this Ad Age paper. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. Now, so I've told you what I'm going to tell you, and now I'm going to tell you. The first thing I want to look at is really our econometric models of newspaper finance. And interestingly enough, you know, you name your company, Procter & Gamble, Lever Brothers, Ford Motor, they know exactly how every dollar into the company translates as dollars coming out. In other words, how you go from investments to revenue. They know exactly how much shelf space you need to have for Tide, heavy-duty laundry detergent, in order to optimize your revenues from selling Tide. But in the newspaper industry, this has never been the case. Actually, I think in the TV news business, this has never been the case. And so back in 2002, Tom Rosenstiel, who was formerly the head of Project for Excellence in Journalism, he and Geneva Overholser, who's a very well-known journalist, asked this question: is good journalism good business? Because they were really fighting back, you know, during this time period, there was just cut in America's newsrooms. And so they were just asking the simple question: does investment in your newsroom lead to lots of revenues? Okay? Nobody knew, because nobody had actually taken a look at it. So we finally got hold of some data the problem is American newspapers don't release any of their financial data. So the reason nobody could look at it, except in a very limited number of cases, was, the financials were just a secret. But fortunately for us, Inland Press, which used to do a very big business in having all the newspapers in the United States, or large numbers of them, report in all their financials, and then they would do a yearly descriptive report about those numbers. They weren't explaining how they made money, they were just describing the flow of revenues, the flow of investments into the newsroom, circulation, and advertising, and how much money they made out on the other end. So I got to, I did a number of years of work on this, and then I realized I just did not have the mathematical skills to do the modeling that you need to do in order to really understand this. And so that's why I went over to the business school, and I found my wonderful colleague, Murali Mantrala, who actually does this kind of econometric modeling for all different kinds of industries. And so I had this data, and I showed it to him, and we started working on it, and lo and behold, we realized that newspapers, TV companies, etc., don't work like selling Tide because they're a platform firm. Now, a platform firm is one where there's two completely separate clients. So in the news business, advertisers are your one client, right? You got to sell advertising to them. But the only reason they want you, newspaper, is because they want your readers. And what do your readers want? Well, most of your readers want the news, right? But it turns out that they also are pretty happy to see most of that advertising if it's well balanced. So what that means is that when you do econometric modeling, you try to figure out how do you make money if you're a platform firm. The money you put into advertising and the money you put into getting readers, that is, into your newsroom, those two interact with each other in a multiplicative way. It's not just a simple linear relationship. So that makes it very hard to model, but very interesting. Okay, so what you want to do when you invest, obviously, is you want to hit the sweet point on this graph, right? If you're over here on the left, like this little stick guy, you're underinvesting. And so that means if you invested more in that business process, you would move up into the top part of that curve and make a higher profit. Now, if you're over-investing, you're like the little guy sliding off on the other side, right? You're putting too much money into that product, and therefore your revenues are going back down again because of the costs of that investment. So what you want to do, any company, including media companies, is you want to hit the sweet spot. So you have to model it. That's the only way you can get there. Otherwise, you just can't tell where you are. Okay, so this is kind of a repetitious little slide, but just to show you that there's that big feedback loop between your ad revenues, which come from your print product and your online product, and your circulation, your subscriptions, both your print and your online. And so what happens is that you invest in your newsroom, you invest in your digital media, you invest in your advertising, selling, and your circulation. And that money goes into that big feedback loop, and that's what determines your profits. So now I'm not showing you the numbers on this because that would be cruel and unusual punishment. But I want to say, I want to just try to share with you the main features of this model and what makes it so powerful. Okay, it predicts three things. It predicts subscription revenue, online and print advertising revenue. Okay, and those are the three big ways that you make money as a newspaper, unless you're doing something like printing other people's papers, etc. Now, you have to, when you do this kind of modeling, you have to be very careful because the over time processes are very great. That is, what you made last week has a huge predictive influence on what you make this week, right? Because you don't, your business doesn't go down or up all of a sudden. It has a lag to it. Newsroom investment affects subscription revenue. Okay, so this makes sense, right? The more money you put into your newsroom, the more money you're going to make with subscriptions, right? Because you got a better product, got a better paper. Sales force investment affects print advertising revenue. That's pretty obvious. So the more sales people you have that you put in there and they're selling stuff, et cetera, the hopefully the more print advertising revenues that you'll have, ditto for your online revenues. And then you have to do some controls for overtime processes. But, and this is the important thing. Okay, so this is inland data, this is what it looks like. I'm not going to bore you with that. But I am going to show you this. This is the coolest thing. So on your left column, that's your investments in newsroom, sales force. The next column is how much output you get. That's your revenues, okay? The next one is it a direct effect or an indirect effect? And the last one is what's called elasticity. And what that means, in its most simple sense, is for every dollar you put in, how much do you get back? So the higher that positive elasticity, the more profitable that business function is for you. Now, notice what's happened. Newsroom has a direct effect on your daily circulation. That makes sense. The better your newspaper, the more it's going to circulate. Salesforce increases your print ad revenue and your online ad revenue. Makes perfect sense. But look what else your newsroom does. Your newsroom impacts positively your print ad revenue and your online ad revenue. That's that feedback loop that I was talking to you about. And look how big those elasticities are. So when you add this thing all up, what you find is good journalism is good business, okay? The more money that goes into your newsroom, not only do the more money you make from your circulation, your subscriptions, the more money you make from your advertising, right? So for us, for those of us that care about journalism, this is great news, right? This means let's put more money into our news and let's stop, cutting people out of our newsrooms. This was one of the first studies we did. It was with inland data. We had 300 newspapers for every year for 5 years. We analyzed them all with this econometric model, and you can see there, those are the percent increases in profit they would have made if they had optimized their investments. So that's a lot of money, right? And the way to do that for those newspapers was to invest in their newsroom. So that was kind of morally good and also really interesting. Now, so this econometric model, we sell this product to quite a number of newspapers, and it has two values. So one value is you can use it as a forecasting model. So the red is what we predicted these companies' numbers would look like, and the blue is what they actually were. And I'm not going to bore you with all the details of all those three graphs, but you can see this model really predicts very, very accurately what circulation performance, revenue performance, etc. So you can use it as a forecasting model. So Seattle Times, what are you going to make in June? I can tell you if you do this modeling. Now, it also has utility for budgeting. So let's say, it's the beginning of the year, and so I say Salesforce, 33% of my total investments, newsroom 34%, new media investment 25%. Okay? And then I'm going to get a current level of profits. In other words, those investments will lead me to that profit level. Now I do my mathematical modeling, like I just was talking to you about, and I say, you know what, this is not the optimal investment pattern. That is the optimal investment pattern. So let's change how you invest in your newsroom, your circulation, your advertising. You implement it, and your profits go up. Okay? So this thing can also, this model that we've developed, and it's basically a theoretical model, can be utilized also for budgeting. Now, the second topic I want to talk to you is paywalls. New York Times went paywall, and then they unpaywalled themselves, and they went back and forth, et cetera, et cetera. But in 2010, most newspapers thought it was nuts to go paywall. But now, I've said 46% here, but I think more than 50% of American dailies are now have a paywall. And what that means is that you can't go online for free anymore and read all their content. You got to pay. Now, some of them have what's called a meter, so you might be able to look at 10 articles before you have to start to pay. But once you hit the paywall, the meter, then you got to start to pay. Okay, so, but where do you start? So what are the best bundles to offer? What are the pricing on those bundles? Well, the only way we've been able to answer that question prior to our research is you ask people, what are you willing to pay to get online news from your local newspaper? Well, guess what they said? Nothing. You know, I'm getting it for free, I'm not paying for it, right? And so that was just completely useless. And, you know, the same thing goes for content. So you say, I'm going to give you some more content. What do you want? I want more everything. I want more sports. I want more business. I want more crime in courts. I want more everything. And you're like, excuse me, I can't give you more everything. What do you want? Okay, so direct questioning is not a good way to find the answers to these questions. So what we did for a number of newspapers, including Seattle, is we went to what's called conjoint analysis. And conjoint analysis is a very powerful theoretical tool because what it allows you to do is take a number of different features of whatever product you're developing. Like if you go out, when you go home, look at your car, you know, where the handles are, where the, you know, what the headlights look like, you know, the color of the leather of your seats relative to the color. All of that stuff was determined by conjoint analysis, okay? So we just took that methodology and turned it over into the news business. So print newspaper, you can get home delivery for 7 days a week. You could get home delivery on just Sunday, or you could not get it at all. Newspaper website, you can get unlimited access for free, which of course many of them have been. Access limited to 20 stories per month or whatever. That just happens to be where you set your meter, or not available at all. And so you go down through all this list of things. Like, what do you want on your smartphone? Unlimited access with ads, unlimited access without ads, or no cell phone access at all. And then you put prices on it. You work with your client and you say, what's the very lowest price point you're thinking about? And what's one that's significantly higher than one that you'll ever reach, okay? So now you have all the variables that you're going to try to test, and what you do in a conjoint is very simple. You simply give them bundles of attributes, and then what they have to do is pick which one they want or none. Okay, so you give them the bundles, you give them a price, and then you just make them choose. And they have to do about 18 of these things. You do it online, it's pretty simple. The analysis is kind of tricky, but you do that. And then you are able to figure out, first of all, these measures. These little things are called willingness to pay, okay? So print access, you can see, now these people are print subscribers. I'm just showing you some examples of some data. These people are print subscribers. So what do print subscribers want? They want that darn paper in their yard every day, right? So you say to them, 7-day print, how much do you want it? Likelihood to pay, $2.87. That's not a price, but that's just it's a number that indicates strength, okay? Sunday only, see, they don't like that as well because they want that 7-day-a-week paper. And not available at all, they don't like that at all because they love that print paper, okay? So across all of these attributes, you can see that what the conjoint generates for you are data about how much people like stuff, the individual features, okay? And that's really important because when you're a newspaper and you got to do your bundling, you got to figure out what features people mostly want, okay? So you get that, and then you put it all together. Now, this looks like a complicated situation here, but it's pretty straightforward. This here is a current situation. And in this current situation, product one, so let's look at these. These are online readers. Now, if you say to an online reader, would you like to get a print paper for free? You know, I'll make you pay for the online, but then I'll throw the paper on your, they go nuts. They're like, no, do not throw that paper on my yard. I don't want it there. You know, the dog plays with it, and when I'm on vacation, it just stacks up. So in this current situation, 7-day print and unlimited online at $5.90 a week, nobody wanted it. They're like, get out of here. Product 2, Sunday only print and unlimited online at $3.15 a week. Well, then you get 7.5%. So they'll be like, okay, give it to me on Sunday. right? Just lets ads and stuff in it. Product 3, unlimited online for 0. Well, these people are freeloaders, right? You're like, give it to me for free, right? So then what you do is you take number 3 away, okay? So it's gone, can't have it. Sorry, we're doing a paywall. And what do? Most of them convert to product 4. Unlimited online at $3.49 a week. Okay, so now these people who've been paying you almost nothing, this is, that last column there is the revenue per 100 people, okay? These worthless individuals have been generating $23.63 per 100 people for you, which is nothing. Look what it jumps up to when you go to that paywall, okay? And that's why, if you read in the New York Times on Sunday, it said the newspapers that have gone to paywall are just, they're happy campers, right? Because look at this increased amount of revenue that they're generating. But the key here is don't guess the number. Analyze the number so you know what's optimal. So that's exactly what the Seattle Times did, and their price for this product, unlimited online, $3.49 a week. Okay, so let's hope that they make a lot of money, and then they'll like me. So I'm not going to say very much about this, but you can do this same kind of analysis with content. So you can say to people, what would be your ideal newspaper or your ideal TV news program? And so you do the conjoint with it. Like here, this is one that we did for one of our client newspapers. And so like hard news. So how much business do you want? How much education do you want? State and local government, technology, and crime and courts. And we got people to make those decisions among those bundles, again. And instead of having cost as being sort of the common denominator, we had the amount of space that they wanted to devote to those various topics. This is how in Jacksonville and a number of other newspapers, we figured out what exactly that newspaper should invest in. Remember I told you it had decided that it was going to hire reporters. And people in Jacksonville said we want 3 things. We want more investigative, we want more depth issue things, and we want more business. So that's what they gave them. They gave them a brand new Sunday section. It's now 4 pages. I think it's going to expand. It's called Reason. It's all about that content. They also bought a bunch of business news from Bloomberg. And what they have found, and then, I love this, they raised prices, okay? So they said to people, you asked for it, this is what you said you wanted, we're giving it to you now. And by the way, there's going to be a 25% price hike on everything. And research indicated that they should have lost about 9% of their subscribers. They lost 1%. That's hot. That's very hot. So the conjoint analysis, it's a theoretical approach. It's an extremely powerful tool that I would argue many companies should be able to use to understand way better what people want and then package it in a way that they'll like it. Now, this pretty building is Reynolds Journalism Institute. Reynolds, this is the Donald W. Reynolds Foundation. Donald W. was a graduate of Mizzou, and his foundation has now given us $90 million over the last few years to build this Journalism Institute. And so this is where we do a lot of this applied research. It's a nice facility, and just as of last week, we joined into a partnership with this company, Mather Economics. Those of you that work in the newspaper business will know this company well because many people have used Mather to figure out where to put that meter in their online, in their efforts to charge for online products. But Mather will be offering our products, our econometric analysis and our conjoint analysis, as well as all the other products that they offer to the newspaper industry. So I think what this says is that, yeah, you can be pretty theoretical, you can publish, but you can also make an impact on the industry, and you can develop, I think, fairly important products that then people in the industry can purchase. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to tell you about is this Communicus project, and it's just like a whole different ballgame. So now we're going to talk about advertising. Communicus developed back in the 1960s. It was a partnership between actually Jerry's dad and the Advertising Research Foundation. And so now Jerry's dad established this company, and she's run it ever since. They have offices in those 3 cities. They do a lot of consumer packaged goods advertising. And what's interesting about the Communicus methodology is that it's all about selective perception and getting rid of the effects of selective perception. Now, you're saying to yourselves, God, is she ever going to stop? Selective perception, what is that? Selective perception is the stuff that you're interested in, you're more likely to pay attention to have come into your awareness. So your perceptual system's not just everything is equal. No. If you're really, really interested in birds, then when you're walking down the street and somebody's talking to you, you're going to be looking at the birds, right? Because you're selectively perceiving them. Now, Advertising Research Foundation discovered 50 years ago that the probability of seeing an ad, okay, of saying, oh yeah, I saw that ad, really depends on selective perception. People that are interested in that brand, people who buy that brand, are much more likely to perceive an ad. So what that means is that when you test the effectiveness of an ad campaign, you cannot only do post-campaign testing. You have to do pre-campaign testing to see how interested they are in the brand, and then you do post-advertising campaign testing, and then you can separate out the people, that love the brand already. Of course they're going to see the ad, but that doesn't mean anything. What really means something is if you catch the people who aren't selectively oriented toward that brand. Okay, so that's what the Communicus method does. And I'm just telling you that part, just so you'll sort of understand the methodology. But so let's talk about the theory, though. Okay, so 2 terrific researchers, one of whom is at Georgia, Lynn Reed, Nihilisi and Reed, over about a 3 or 4 year period, talked to hundreds of advertising professionals. And they said to them, how does advertising work? They didn't say, what's your theory, right? Because they didn't want to be, run out on a rail. But they said, how do you think advertising works? And then they sifted through all of that language that, erupted when practitioners were asked that question. And it turns out that they thought that 3 things happened. That advertising worked as a function of 3 processes, okay? The first, and they didn't call it persuasion knowledge theory, that's what it's actually called in the literature, but they said, you know what, particularly for TV and for radio, people do not want to see ads. They don't want to be persuaded. In fact, if you say to a person, does that ad persuade you to buy those boots? They say, no, of course not. I mean, only a dummy would be persuaded by an ad to buy boots, or anything else for that matter, okay? So there's a negativity that just instantly kicks in when somebody is trying to convince you of something, okay? And advertisers recognize that. It's a barrier that they have to get over in order to get you to buy those boots. The second process they talked about is mutation effects, and another word for this is wear out. So the first time you see a really kind of cute ad, you like it. The second time you're like, well, that's pretty cute. The 50th time you see the ad, you hate it, okay? That's wear out. That's what they called mutation of effects. And so what that means is you have to keep things fresh all the time, because otherwise your ads will remember Mr. Whipple? Is anybody in here old enough to remember Mr. Whipple, right? He would like run into grocery stores and squeeze the Charmin. And he did this for 18 years. I think he was an alcoholic by the end of the time that he had to, was squeezing the Charmin. And the thing was, the thing wore out like crazy because it was just repeated too often. So that's mutation effects. But the good thing that can happen is break through and engage. This is the holy grail of advertising, because sometimes you have an ad that is so good, it's irresistible, okay? So this is what the practitioners said. So clearly they were onto something. They had kind of what we would call a theory. So what we did is we said, yeah, let's articulate this as a formal theory. And the only thing that we're going to change about what they've claimed is that we're going to say that when you are exposed to a persuasive message, let's say it's an ad for little chocolate candies, there's one part of you that says, I don't respond to advertising, I'm above it. And if I don't like chocolate, if I don't like Hershey's, I don't eat those little candies, okay? The other part of you is like, oh, they look like Easter bunnies, So in other words, there's a positive response that you have. So the ratio of that positive response to the negative response is going to determine how well that ad does. So we've just we've combined the breakthrough and engage with that negativity toward the persuasive process. Does that make sense? All right. Okay. It turns out, and this is what happened when I was talking to Jerry about, she had been working for a number of years trying to figure out for clients, is it worthwhile to invest in social media? So like every client about 5 or 7 years ago decided that he had to have a Facebook page. Why? Well, because everybody has a Facebook page. And then when Twitter came along, oh, I have to tweet. I have to tweet my product out there. Why? Well, because that's what's done. Okay? But it costs you a lot of money to run those things, right? Is there any payoff in terms of enhanced effectiveness of your ad campaign if you use those social media? So this was the question she was trying to ask for lots and lots of clients. And it turns out if you use that theory that I just articulated to you, you can come up with some really interesting observations. First, TV advertising is still a 900-pound gorilla, because that's the thing that gives you reach. If you look at how much reach the little social, like Facebook pages for, Hanes pantyhose, like there's hardly anybody that goes there. But when they go there, the effect is intense, okay? So TV and traditional media give you reach. Social media, just a narrow little slice. So why should you invest in social media? Well, because in social media, what happens is people get fooled into thinking that nobody's persuading them. Because they go there, I went there myself. I chose to go to the Facebook page. I chose to give them a thumbs up. Okay? So nobody was doing it to me. And you know what else? There's a whole lot of consumer comments. Comments from people like me. People that have, like the mommy places where you go in there and all the mommies say, I love Pampers. My kid never has diaper rash because I use Pampers. And I'm like, whoa, that's good enough for me. Okay? So when you go to the social media site, you knock out the negativity, right? You don't have a lot of people that's happening to, but you knock out the negativity. So, and the other thing that the social media site does is that, and we don't quite understand why this is, but it's probably related to that knocking out the negativity, is that it makes you experience more affinity with a brand. And I know a lot of people are not in advertising, think affinity with brand is disgusting, but we love brands, right? The reason you buy stuff is because you love the brand for the most part. And so if you can get people to say, I'm like that brand, that is my brand. That's my brand of chocolate, Hershey's. Okay, then you've sold your customer. So this is the funnel where you go from big reach with your traditional media, but not so much impact on affinity, down to the end of that funnel where you got a lot fewer people, but you've got this development of this tremendous relationship of affinity, and that's how you combine them. That's how you combine your social media with your traditional media. So here's Hershey's Kisses. This is their online site a few days ago. And what's it say? It's kind of cute and it's colorful. And it says, join us on Facebook. Okay? So there's their social media site. Okay. So one of the things, they do thousands of things for kids, for older people, etc. But one of the things they do is they ask a question every day. So this weekend it was, 2 Hershey's Kisses milk chocolates are better than 1. And then you get to agree or not. And you're like, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. But they get lots and lots of responses to that. And so not only do you get to build that affinity, you get to see the affinity these other people have. Now you have to be careful with that because sometimes people say nasty things about your brand. But it turns out that nasty things about your brand is still very powerful too, right? Because I'm out there, I'm asking people. And if they want to say bad things to me, and I mean, if I want to say bad things about them, then that means that's truth. And that's different from advertising. Can you see that? So anyway, that's an example of what these social media sites look like. Now for findings. So first of all, selective perception is higher for social media. And this makes perfect sense with regard to the theory, right? Because if you actually bought, how many of you have been to the Hershey's Kisses site? Thank you, that's so sweet. See, most of you will never go to the Hershey's Kisses site, okay? And that's fine, but once you do, look out, because now you're looking for Hershey's Kisses everywhere, okay? You've built up that affinity, and so that means any ad that comes on for Hershey's Kisses, you're gonna be watching it, all right? So way higher selective perception for social media. Okay, TV creates higher impact on brand attribute perceptions. Okay, the good thing about TV is that it has huge reach and it tells you some facts. You know, it tells you that solo cleans, solo softens, solo reduces static cling. And you don't have to worry about some customer saying, no, you know, I wash my clothes in it and they all stick together with static cling. No, you don't have to worry about it. You control the message. And so TV advertising is a wonderful medium for that. And you can see in those examples that the social media is creating kind of a negative response there. And TV, which you can't see very well at all, is creating a much more positive one. So TV does you some good, you know, besides just the reach. Okay. But, as I just told you, social media create much higher impact on brand affinity. So things like, this brand is really cool, or this brand really reflects my personality, my specialness. That's what social media really just give you very, very strongly. Okay. But social media need to be married to TV advertising. Why? Because the only way you ever get to that Hershey's Kisses site and become the friend of a Hershey's Kiss is by seeing a TV ad for it, or a magazine ad, or a radio ad, or whatever. So what that means is that TV gives you the driver. That's the main driver for getting to the social medium. And you can see there that, I don't know, looks like you can't see there, but the big blue column there is for a snack brand with a big television campaign behind it. And the tiny little thing next to it is without television. So social media they're dead in the water without TV. And the same thing you see even more exaggeratedly for that beverage brand. Okay, so in the 2012 Super Bowl, there was an ad that starred, what is this guy's name? Matthew Broderick. okay? And it was an ad for Honda CRVs. And in the ad, Matthew Broderick replayed his role as Ferris Bueller. So he calls up his boss and says, I can't make any movies today because I'm sick. And so, how many of you have seen Ferris Bueller? How many have seen it 10 times? That's very good. Okay. So I don't have to tell you about that. But this was an extremely popular TV ad. Now, what Honda did, with Jerry's help and with a lot of data behind it, is they created a social media site where you would go into that site and say, if I had a day off, what would I do? What would be my special things? And people responded to this thing by the thousands. And so it was, it's a direct link. And it turns out, this is the happiest part of this story, not that you'd ever want to, tell them what you would do, why would you tell Honda what you really want to do? I mean, when you think about that, that's not very smart, but it worked. So those who saw the commercial remembered it and connected it with a day off. And in fact, 10 million people watched that ad before it was even on the Super Bowl and loved it. I mean, many people watched it many, many times. Those who saw the commercial and went to the social media site really got, what is that? Affinity. Honda CRV is for me. They were much more likely to agree with that statement. And the very best part is for 6 months after that dual campaign ran, the Honda CRVs got more showroom visits than ever before. And that was from people that got both. If you just saw the ad, didn't work as well. If you just went to the social media site, didn't work as well. But if you did both, then you really scored. So I think that's a good example. I think I have a slide about that. Okay. So I think this ad age example is an interesting one because it involves theorizing by practitioners. The actual practitioners had developed this, the main components of that theory. We took it and worked on it, and then we applied it again, and sure enough, it really seemed to help us understand, what is the difference between a visit to a social media site for a brand and a TV ad for a brand? And then it took us farther because it said, how do I optimally put them together? Okay, there have to be relationships. So my argument to you is that practitioner data is way more useful when you connect it with theory. If you don't connect it with theory, what works for you today may or may not work for you tomorrow, and you don't know why. But with theory, because you're starting to understand that process, you're much more likely to understand changes that occur to you tomorrow. Theoretical applications can produce business success. And if you think about a big communication school like this one, and all the research that goes on here, think about the potential for applying a lot of that research into the industry, making partnerships, and improving business performance. And the other thing that's really cool is that when you work with practitioners, your theories can't just be all in the clouds. They have to work, because if they don't work, your practitioners aren't going to want to play ball with you anymore. Okay? So it's a tremendous application of discipline to the academic theorist, I think. So what does that lead to? Synergy of theory and practice, which I've attempted to tell you is something that I think is very, very important for academics, very important for those of you who are in various businesses, and I think that communication schools can provide this for you. So thank you very much. I'd like to thank all of our partners here in this research, and I'm thrilled to be here. Oh, and I forgot to say one thing, and that is I told Mr. Morris that I was coming, and he was very pleased, and I told him how tickled I was that I was invited to do this. I'm very grateful for the invitation, and I've loved presenting to you. So thank you very much.
So we might be able to entertain a few questions, but I want to present Esther with a book by one of our own photographers, Jared Foster. Jared, if you could just stand up briefly. Jared's in the back. He's a real artist, and the book is about visual storytelling, and it consists of his photographs and interviews with photographers. The jackrabbit on page 5 is priceless. Check it out.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jared.
So maybe rather than formal questions, what we'll do is we'll just mingle for a while, and Esther will be available. And thank you very much for turning out. Thank you.